Hello, buddy. Welcome back. I'm the Strategy Professor, and today we're going to be doing a Yuumi guide for patch 10.6. So, special thanks to Black Falcon for sponsoring this. If you'd like to sponsor a guide yourself, just email me at thestrategyprofessor@gmail.com. Let me know what you have in mind. We can set that up. It's just a $30 donation if you're not a channel member. If you are a channel member, then it's just $25, and you can become a member either by hitting that join button on YouTube or by going through the PayPal link in the description if you prefer to do it that way. So, members get $5 off of any guides, any coaching sessions, and you also get to come out and play with me and other members of the community on Sundays when we just play some normals for fun, if we get enough members that show up for that. And you're supporting a channel that tries to give you the true in-depth content, not just the clickbait title. So if you want to do that, go ahead and check that out. We also stream every night around 10:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. It's a very friendly, chill community. We'd love to have you. We usually go till about 2:30 or 3 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, usually about 4.5 hour stream. And that's on YouTube, not on Twitch, just on YouTube these days. So be sure to come check that out. And if you like guides like this, I'll have this in a playlist that'll have a lot of other guides as well that you can flip through and check out at your leisure. And we also have topical guides like best one-trick champions, how to macro better, how to micro better, fresh tier lists for every patch. So come by, check it out. Have a lot of content on the channel. Okay, let's go ahead and kick off this Yuumi guide with a little bit of a history lesson on Yuumi here, because I think it's very important to contextualize sort of where she was on release in the summer of last year, and then kind of how she degenerated over time, lost a lot of play rate, and then why she's been having a resurgence lately, and sort of what changes precipitated that, and why she's actually becoming pretty good in this meta right now, even though a lot of people still kind of disrespect her because we're just used to her being so bad, you know, for the last 5 or 6 months or so. Well, let's look at the history here. So when she very first released, at the end of May, kind of near June, she wasn't that strong at first, right? She had like a below a 40% win rate for the first couple of weeks, but then her win rate started going up, and especially in professional play, she was basically 100% pick banned once people were allowed to play her a couple of weeks in, right? So and people started emulating that in solo queue as well. So you saw that her ban rate went up to about 45% as everybody was learning the correct builds on her and trying to emulate the pros, although her win rate never really got ultra high, even though she was banned all the time. This is when she was considered the most OP, right? Before there were any nerfs on her. When she had that really high ban rate and 100% pick ban and pro. Okay, that very, very rarely happens for a support to have 100% pick ban, but she did have that. Then they did several nerfs to her, and you see that her ban rate kind of fell off a cliff, and she just really had virtually no presence by about December or so. And the win rate kind of coincided with that as well. It just sort of stair-stepped all the way back down to below 40% in mid-December. And you can see her popularity is kind of dropping off ever since the very beginning of when she released. But if you'll notice on these charts, there has been a marked change, right? So her win rate since that December spiked back up to about 46%. And you'll notice now it's actually higher, her win rate is in solo queue, than it was when she was considered the most OP. According to at least the ban rates and pro and all of that stuff, when people thought of her as the most OP, she's actually even stronger than that. She's, clocking in at about a 49% win rate over the last few patches. She's a little bit under that right now. And then the popularity lagged that a little bit, but she's becoming increasingly popular as well, and the bans have also started to pick up on that. So what's up with that? Why is this, what do they change about Yuumi? Well, they changed about 1 million different things starting in December, and I'm not going to go over all of them, but I do want to touch on a couple of things that I think will be pretty big for how you want to think of her on patch 10.6 and moving forward, unless they make some more dramatic changes to her in the future, about what's going to be strong with her. So pretty much around like 9:16 or so, they started just giving her some outright nerfs, empowered damage, all this stuff. But this is where they gave her the mini rework, and that's what I want to talk about. And this is patch 9.24, and that was really kind of in December when we started to see those changes. And a lot of people thought of this as a pretty big nerf overall, and that's what most of the community thought. They're like, okay, she's dead. But it was a lot more complicated than that. And I think at the time, I said I really wasn't sure, honestly, if it was going to be good or bad. But I thought that I think I said it was going to be like maybe slightly net positive if people could play around the W changes. But I certainly didn't expect her win rate and her play rate to go up as much as it did, although I think I was a bit more positive on it than other analysts. Okay, so they gave her back the mana on hit. That's her passive, which we'll talk about here in a second, and they increased the shield value by quite a bit. So they had taken away the extra mana, so her mana costs were really, really difficult to manage early on, so they gave her back the mana cost, so that's pretty good. And then they kind of changed around her Q, ended up being about power neutral. It gave her a little bit more base power because it started doing a percentage of max health. I think if they didn't do it on that patch, they did on this patch on 10.3. But they gave it a percentage max health of the target's health, and then they lowered the mana cost there. So they made the mana overall a lot more manageable for her early on, and she wasn't as dependent on AP to do a lot of extra damage. So doesn't scale as well with AP, does about the same amount of damage on her Q as she used to, and the mana cost became a bit more manageable. Now, this is the thing that a lot of people noticed that felt like a really bad quality of life nerf to her. If she gets hit by an immobilizing effect, then it puts you and me on a 5-second cooldown. So before this, you could pretty much always activate you and me and jump back on your ally as long as it was off cooldown, and the cooldown was pretty short on it. And they had to hit you in transit. So if you were in the middle of jumping onto somebody and Thresh flayed you, it would knock you out of it and put it on cooldown. But now, if you just get hit by any piece of CC, then it puts it on cooldown. So if you get hooked by something like a Blitzcrank, a Thresh, a Nautilus, Leona, whatever, then it's on cooldown. Even if you aren't in transit, they just grab you, then it's on cooldown. So that's a pretty big nerf to her survivability, and if you get caught out, it feels really bad. In exchange for this, however, they gave her scaling on her W to where it scales off the person that she's anchored to, not Yuumi herself. So usually that's going to be net positive. We'll talk about that more when we talk about her abilities here in a second. That was basically a pretty big buff to the amount of AP and AD that she gives out. And one of the biggest effects here is her heal now grants up to 45% bonus attack speed on somebody, which is a very large amount. Attack speed is, I believe, 25 each. So that's about 1,100 gold worth of value there. So I think it's that much. Let me see. Yeah, it's 25 each. That's a dagger for the attack speed. So yeah, the 25 times 45. So that's not inconsequential. That's, about 3 or 4 kills worth of gold that you can give to somebody with your E. It's no longer on a charge system, so you don't cast it multiple times. But it does have a bigger AP ratio. The overall cooldown goes down quite a bit. And it gives a flat movement speed of 25% with pretty high scaling, and the movement speed is increased to 3 seconds and no longer decays. So 3 full seconds of at least 25% movement speed with a huge increase to attack speed. So this was overall, like, her burst healing on a single target once in a fight was a little bit lower because you didn't have 2 charges, but her extra utility, giving the extra attack speed, giving the sustained reliable movement speed, and being able to cast this multiple times for a fairly high value, gave her a lot more utility, especially in longer fights. So those were some of the really big changes they did to her that ended up ultimately being net positive. So let's talk about Yuumi here really quick, her abilities, and we'll talk about her place in the meta, when you want to pick her, when you don't want to pick her. And then we'll go into some recommended runes, recommended items, and then just a couple of things you can think about in the laning phase when you're trading early on and how you should be positioning. Okay. So Yuumi has some of the lowest base stats in the game. Shouldn't be a surprise to a lot of people. If she gets caught out, then she's going to take a lot of damage and probably die. She typically does not have a lot of movement speed. Sometimes people get boots on her. We'll talk about that here in a second, when you shouldn't get boots. But often, she's just very squishy, and if she gets caught, she's going to die. And that's offset by the fact that she's basically invulnerable in most situations whenever she's attached to somebody, which particularly makes her very attractive in the pro scene whenever she is good, because that is one of the weaknesses historically of one of the enchanter type of champions, is that they can get picked off and blown up really easily, and it makes it difficult for them to get vision control later on in the game because they can't check bushes, and if the enemy team has a fed assassin, they can pick you off. So just picking a squishy enchanter a lot of the times in pro has been a no-no. That's why tanks, for the vast majority of the pro scene, have been kind of the go-to style of champion, because they can survive assassins a little bit better and they can face check bushes a lot better. No, there have been some metas, obviously, in like Season 6 when you had the Arden Sensor meta, and some off and on metas with things like Karma and like heavy pressure poke metas that do get used. But by and large, that's one of the big downfalls of a lot of enchanters in Pro, and Yuumi gets around that because she's untargetable. Okay, so really low base stats. Let's talk about her abilities. Now, most of them cost a lot of mana, especially early on, so it's very difficult to just spam these without consequence. So it's 90 base mana, even at level 1 for your Prowling Projectile, and your heal is 100 mana and scales up to 160 mana. So just absurd mana cost. Your ultimate's kind of a standard 100 mana, but it is extremely expensive to manage her costs early on, and her mana pool is not even that high in the early game. She has 400 mana, so that means you can basically cast 4 spells, pretty much, and then you're out of mana. Now, they try to offset this by encouraging you to jump off of somebody, so when you're attached, they want you to jump off and auto-attack that person to get your mana back. And this is one thing that's changed over time. Her mana cost used to be like a normal, mana cost for an enchanter, and then she just had, almost infinite mana with Bop and Block. And that's one of the things that made her really OP. But now you have to activate this, or you're just going to run out of mana and not be able to do anything in the laning phase. So whenever you pop off of somebody every 20 seconds to 8 seconds based on levels, so early game, it's going to be 20 to 15 seconds probably during the laning phase. Her next basic attack gains 50 range, is a non-projectile, so it happens instantly. It gets around like Braum walls, Yasuo walls, things like that. And it restores 50 to 160 mana and grants you a shield for, in the laning phase, 60 to 140 with a 0.3 AP ratio. So if you can pop off and land that auto attack on somebody, then it basically reduces the cost on your early game Prowling Projectiles. About every 1 or 2 of those, you're going to be able to activate this. So anywhere from 30 reduced mana cost to 60 reduced mana cost, depending on how often you're casting it, is a good way to think of your mana management. And that makes it a lot more reasonable, right? That's making it somewhere between 30 to 60 mana every time you cast this, which is about more in line with a lot of early game enchanter harassment type of spells. So if you're hopping off, activating this very often, then her mana is fairly manageable early on. Your heal is still very expensive, though. So you really don't want to use that heal a ton in the early game unless you absolutely have to, but it does make your Q a bit more palatable. Now, the Q itself, the empowered range, I think it has to go for up to 1 second. So if it's not point blank, if they are, I don't know what the exact range is, it depends on how you curve it, but if they're pretty much like maybe 300 units or more away from you, so like maybe half an auto attack range, something like that, then you're going to be able to activate this for that extra 1 second, get that empowered damage, which ends up doing, in the early game, somewhere between 45 to 125 damage, and then around 2 to 4.4 of the target's current health. So if a lot of people, fairly early on in the laning phase are at 800 or 900 health, 4% of 800 health would be like 32 extra damage. So it's going to be doing, about 150 or so at level 5, 150 to 180 damage if you land it. So it's not like an insane amount of damage, but it's okay. It's all right for the cost. It does have a long cooldown early on, starts at 13.5 and scales all the way down to 6. And yeah, it should be something that's pretty high chance you're going to hit it. It's basically a homing missile. They can juke you a little bit with it, or if they're like hiding behind their minions, it can be kind of hard to hit it. Or if your AD carry is standing like super far back and it's not anywhere close to the line, it can be difficult to hit it. But in general, you should be hitting 70% of these most of the time in the laning phase whenever you land them. So it's designed around the fact that it's a very high probability piece of harassment. And so yeah, that's just kind of how she's balanced. Now, it's only the homing missile if you're attached. If you're not attached, then it just goes in a straight line, and most people are going to be able to dodge that most of the time. It's a pretty slow-moving projectile. Okay, so yeah, just a little bit of poke, a little bit of harass. It does apply a slow, although it's worth noting that the slow is much, much lower than it used to be. It's only 20% for 1 second. I think it used to scale up. I'm not going to go through all of that text of the Yuumi changes, but I'm pretty sure it used to scale up to be much more than that for at least 2 seconds, if not 3 seconds. So it's a much lower slow than it used to be in the past. Okay, Yuumi. So you start off with 1 point in this. This is pretty much always what you want to max last. Usually you want to max Q or you want to max E. We'll talk about here in a second what the different situations are for when you would want to max different ones. But you pretty much get Yuumi last. And the reason for this is the cooldown is just based on your level. It's not based on how many points in it. And the amount of scaling that you get off of it is pretty low. I mean, you get an extra 2 flat adaptive every time you level it up. And you get an extra 2% of somebody's maximum adaptive damage, right? Their AD or their AP. It picks the highest one and does it that way. So it's really not that much of a percentage gain. So you kind of want to save this for the end. So it's a very powerful single point ability because it's going to give both you and your AD carry or whoever you're attached to a flat 12 adaptive force and then 12% of that person's max adaptive force. So if it's your AD carry and they have 100 attack damage, then it's going to end up giving you 12 extra adaptive force, or it's going to give them 12 extra adaptive force, which is that's basically 12 ability power, or translated into AD, which is more powerful than ability power stat wise. So how that works, adaptive force, if you don't know, just to put that in there. So I'm trying to think of that. I shouldn't have started that because I'm thinking of the math on hand. But bonus attack damage is basically worth 35 gold, and then ability power is worth 22 gold. So basically it's worth 50% more or so. The bonus attack damage is worth 50% more gold, roughly, than ability power. And so whenever you get something that's like 100 adaptive force, then it's going to take it down a certain percentage. So you would get 100 AP out of that if it was 100 adaptive force, but you might only get like 50 bonus AD out of that. I don't know the exact numbers offhand, what the conversion rate is, but that's basically why they call it adaptive force. It's pretty much AP, but it can turn into AD, but it'll give you a lot less AD than AP because AD is more valuable because it applies not only to abilities but also to auto attacks. So anyways, long story short, put 1 point in this. This is going to allow you to attach to people. Now, once that timer is completed, then you can hop off of somebody and you're going to be ready to go to jump back on them. So the timer is how long you have until you can jump back onto a new target once you jump off. Okay, so it's not the timer before you can jump off. You can jump back on and jump back off immediately anytime you want, but you're not going to be able to get back on for a while if you do that. And you can jump to other people without triggering this cooldown. So if you're within range, if you're within 700 range of somebody else, let's say it's a team fight, there's you, the jungler, and your AD carry, you can jump onto your AD carry. It'll start the static cooldown, and then you can jump over to your jungler anytime you want, and this cooldown will remain the same. It'll start ticking down overall. So as long as you're jumping back and forth between different champions, then there's no cooldown on that. The cooldown is only when you jump off of a champion and you're just by yourself, then you can jump back onto people again after the cooldown is up. And remember, like we just mentioned a second ago, the dash is, if it's interrupted by an immobilizing effect, then it's on a 5-second cooldown. I'm pretty sure it's even if it's not dashed. It's straight up, if you just get hit by a hook, I'm pretty sure that you can't reattach for 5 seconds. That's worded a little weird there. But I'm almost positive that if you get hit by any sort of CC, regardless of if you're dashing or not, you still can't attach for 5 seconds. So they did that to make her more vulnerable. So if you do get hit while you're off, then there is a 5-second window where they can finish you before you're able to get away. Okay. Yeah, and she's flying between people. Now, keep in mind that when you're flying between people, you are vulnerable as well. So when you jump between your AD carry and your jungler, if you're trying to jump onto them, if you get hit by any sort of immobilizing CC, it will stop that movement. So for example, if the Thresh is just like trying to flay back the jungler and you're trying to jump onto that jungler at the same time and the Thresh just happens to flay you back, it will knock you out of there and you'll be on the 5-second cooldown. You can also get hit and damaged by anything while you're midair. So if you try to jump between your AD carry and you're jumping over to your jungler and you get hit by a Ziggs bomb or like an Amumu ult or something like that, it's going to deal damage, and if it does CC, it's going to CC you. So you're not invulnerable. When you're jumping between people, you move fairly quickly. It's unlikely someone's going to be able, at most levels of play, to do a skill shot to hit you while you're jumping. but you can get hit accidentally by stuff. So just be really careful if you're trying to jump around in the middle of a crazy team fight where there's lots of damage, like AoE abilities going off, especially if you're at low health. You want to be very, very cautious of that because you can get hit by stuff. You can get CC'd while you're in transit, even from, from person to person. You can still get hit. Okay. So just be aware of that. Another thing is you really, you need to practice Yuumi, and this is partially where the skill comes in. A lot of people think she's a no-skill champ. There's actually quite a bit of skill to her in most fights because it's so dangerous to pop off and to get this bop and block so that you refill your mana, you get that big shield. I mean, that's a huge shield. Later on in the game, at level 11, a 220 shield, if you can hop off of somebody and then auto-attack them again, and get a free 200 shield to somebody. That's like having a free Janna shield if you can get that and put that on somebody. Pretty close to it. So it's a big deal if you're a good Yuumi player and you can pick a good time to jump off, auto attack, and then jump back on to get that shield. So there is some skill to her positioning, and one of the biggest skill things is figuring out where you need to be, jumping between person to person, and keeping track of where you are and what's going on. Because if you try to jump onto somebody who is maybe 650 units away, and they do a dash before you get your click off, and it's like a Lucian, and they just dash out of range, or it's a Vayne and she tumbles out of range, and you click on the ground, you're going to accidentally jump off of your person, and you're not going to be attached to the other person. And you might have a cooldown whenever you jump off, and you're not going to be able to reattach. And that can be very disorienting in fights. So if you try to jump on that Lucian, maybe you're attached to the jungler, you try to, Lucian's in trouble, he's low on health, and you try to jump on him, and he dashes away, all of a sudden you jump off of your, the jungler, and then you're like, oh crap, I'm off the jungler, and then it's 5 seconds before you can reattach, and you've got to run around, and now all of a sudden you're very vulnerable. So it can, and then maybe you thought you were attached to the Lucian because you see yourself jump off. There's all these abilities going off everywhere, and now you're looking at Lucian and you're thinking you're attached to Lucian, and you're like, wait a minute, I'm not attached to Lucian anymore. I'm way back over here. I'm getting hit by all this stuff. So it can be really disorienting trying to jump around because you're trying to look at your targets and their health, and a lot of times you're not you can get into a bad habit of not looking at yourself or thinking about yourself because you're used to being attached to somebody in these team fights. Whenever you get accidentally unattached, it's a big problem. Or if you attach to somebody who's about to do something really dumb and you stay attached, like they, YOLO into 4 people, that's a big problem too. So you need to make the call, hey, I'm going to unattach from this person and bail on this situation. Because if you go into a bad situation and the person you're attached to dies and there's no one else nearby that you can attach to, or you get CC'd or something, you're not getting away, you're going to die too, right? So, yeah, more so on Yuumi than almost anybody else, you have to be very careful who you're trying to help and how you're positioning because you are going to die if the situation goes south, right? It's almost impossible for you to get away or to turn the fight around if you're unattached. So that's really where the skill comes in. So you got to get the practice in there. You got to figure out who you're going to attach to, who you're not going to attach to, and just kind of watch yourself, watch your positioning, make sure you're not getting hit by weird stuff while you're in transit, make sure you're within range. So that can actually be quite tricky. If you've never played her, it can be quite tricky. I will say that, there's a reason that in solo queue, right now she only has a 48% win rate or whatever it is, 49% win rate. And it's not because she's easy. Most relatively easy champions are going to have a higher win rate. You look at someone like a Sona, who's pretty easy, and then Janna and maybe to a slightly lesser extent Nami are not that difficult, right? They're okay, but they're not that crazy difficult to play, right? So a lot of times the easier champions, I think Sona's the poster child for this. They're gonna have higher win rates, right? So if Yuumi was really easy to play, she would have a higher win rate than 49%. So don't let it fool you. Now, that's not always the metric. It's not always the fact that hard champions, have a lower win rate, but that's a very high correlation that champions that, even if they're strong, I think Rakan is extremely good right now, for example, if they're challenging to play, that's going to bring their win rate down quite a bit. Okay, and then we come to Zoomies here. Now, this is really what's making Yuumi so strong right now in this meta. There are several things about this. First of all, it can be a pretty big heal. So like 210 with a 40% AP ratio. Not that crazy of a heal, but it's only on an 8-second cooldown, so, you know, it's a pretty nice little heal. And the fact that you combine this with Athene's is what gives her that huge burst of healing, because you can stack up your Athene so easily with your Q, because it has such a long range. It's a homing missile, so when you're attached to somebody and everyone's just kind of looking at each other and you're just spamming your Qs, if you just hit them a couple of times with Qs, you're going to have your Athenes charged up. And then whenever you do that E on somebody, it's going to heal them. Also, if you're taking, if you have like Revitalize, or they have Spirit Visage, or anything like that, then it's going to make that heal huge. It's going to look like, oh my god, you just healed him for like 700 or something. So that's how you get the massive Yuumi heals, is full Athene stacks plus your E. And because she can stack the Athene so comfortably, a lot of other champions, it's kind of dangerous to get in range to stack the Athenes outside of team fights, because you're vulnerable. But with Yuumi, if you're attached to somebody, then you're not going to be as vulnerable. So you can just kind of, you know, just free fire these howling projectiles later on, stack it up, and then you've got that big heal ready to go. The other thing that is making her a lot stronger right now is this movement speed. It starts off at 15%, and then is 10% of your total AP, so it very easily gets up to 25%. I mean, 100 AP is like basically you get Athenes and Frostfang, and boom, that's it. So it's very, very simple to get to 100 AP, and a lot of times in kind of longer games, you can get to 200 AP. So you can get to, you know, 25% to 35% bonus movement speed for 3 seconds. That's a very long time. And just think of the kinds of champions that are really strong right now, especially as of patch 10.6, right? We've got, especially the top laners, you've got Darius is still really good. Set's really good. You've got champions like Wukong, who's really good right now. Garen's really good. And then other champions like Diana, Echo. There's so many like very high threat champions that have quite a bit of, they'll either have quite a bit of resistances or other forms of damage mitigation that really want to be able to stick to people to do a ton of damage. Darius is probably the most notable one, but a lot of the other ones like that too. Why is that good? Well, whenever, first of all, the movement speed is going to help them get close, but then also that healing is more powerful on champions that have other ways to mitigate damage, because it makes the health more valuable on them. So, for example, if you're thinking about a Darius that has even 100 armor, right, and you heal him for 100, that means it's going to take 200 physical damage to cancel out that heal. If the Darius has 200 armor, then it's going to take 400 damage to cancel out that heal, right? So think about it this way. Every 1 point of armor that somebody has, then it takes 1% more physical damage to do 1 total damage to that person. Okay, so like I said, if they have the 200 armor, you give them a 100 heal, then it's going to take 300. I think I may have said 400. It's going to take 300. If you give them the 100 heal, it's going to take 200% more damage, 200% of 100 to 200% more than the... It's going to take 300. It's going to take 300 damage to do it, right? Versus if you're trying to heal somebody that has, like, I don't know, 50 armor or something like that, it's going to be much, much lower. It's only going to take 150 damage to break that 100 heal that you give them, okay? So that's why when it's a tank meta, enchanters are so strong. The same is true of shields. Shields aren't reduced by grievous wounds, which is a huge thing, but heals are still really good, especially if they don't have grievous wounds. So when we're in a meta where you're seeing a lot of, hey, thanks for the sub, I appreciate it. When we're seeing a lot of Darius's, Sets, Garen's, all these other tanky things, Zac, all this stuff flying in, and that's going to make heals like Zoomies really big. And that's doubly good on Yuumi, because when they don't die, that means you don't die. So when you're sitting on that Darius and you're just constantly, you know, spamming Zoomies and CCing them with Final Chapter and slowing them with Prowling Projectile and speeding up Darius with Zoomies, it just turns into this huge, like, just ecosystem of destruction, right? Where they're never going to kill the Darius and they're never going to kill you because you're attached to the Darius. So that's why all of that synergizes so well together with Yuumi and aggressive tanks. And you also give out a lot of extra bonus attack speed. So this makes her a little bit more flexible. So yeah, Darius is going to like attack speed. Garen's going to like attack speed. But some of these other champions that are coming back in, especially most notably probably Vayne, is really going to like this. Right now the problem with Yuumi Vayne though is you can get bullied really hard early. But if you do get to late game, being able to hand out that extra movement speed and the extra 45% attack speed can be quite good. So that gives her a little bit of extra versatility and makes her good on champions that want to take Gensus, like a Vayne, like a Master Yi, even things like a Diana, who's not going to get Gensus, but obviously she likes the attack speed a lot. So that makes her really good with a lot of the types of champions that are pretty good right now. And then final chapter is going to be really insane as well. Has a massive hitbox. It takes up almost the whole range, so it doesn't tell you the width here, but the thing is so wide. It feels like it's twice as wide as a Sona ult and probably like 200 or 300 units longer. And the thing is, they can't just one-time dodge this either, right? So if they dash to the side or they flash it or whatever, you still have the opportunity to reposition and still get the root on them. And it lasts for 1.75 seconds, which is a really long time. Sona's, by comparison, is 1.5 seconds. It's a smaller width, and you have to hit them with that one shot, which is flashable. It's a lot harder to flash out a final chapter. And it does pretty decent damage, too. 240 base is pretty high with a 0.8 ratio. And it's on a low cooldown, relatively low, at 130 seconds. So, and they can't interrupt you, right? Like, while you're channeling this, if you're attached to somebody, they can't just blow you up or CC you to shut you up because they have to kill the person that you're attached to. Right, so even if they CC the person that you're attached to, you can still get that root off. So that's one of the things that's just like really obnoxious about Yuumi is you just can't really interact with her unless you kill the person that she's attached to. So all of this makes her very good in a meta with these kind of super tanks that need a lot of mobility. They're just trying to run people down, and that's what we have right now, and that's why she's been rising up in the ranks a little bit. Okay. Let's talk about, so her strengths overall is she does have that great utility. She has a solid heal. She gives out the attack speed and the movement speed. She herself is invulnerable, especially later on when you're attached to those tanks. In the laning phase, you are kind of vulnerable. If your ADC gets caught out, you're going to die too most of the time. You're both going to be squishy. But it's really in that mid-game when you can kind of roam around a little bit and you're able to attach to the Darius, to attach to the Echo, to attach to some of these other just kind of bruisery meatball type of champions. And that's when she starts to become really strong. And you saw this last fall a little bit at Worlds and in the patches leading up to Worlds, you'd have a Garen Yuumi bot lane before several nerfs on the Yuumi. Like, that's how extreme she was. That's how good she was with things like Garen, is that people would actually run Garen in the bot lane in professional games with Yuumi. Now, Garen was really strong at the time, too, but you would not see Garen without Yuumi in the bot lane. It was totally the Yuumi that was making that happen. So, yeah, very, very good on those types of champs. Excellent ult. We just talked about that, and she's excellent with tanks for the reasons that I just described above, because she gives them a lot more survivability with the movement speed, with her heal, but then also that, in turn, gives her a lot more survivability because their HP is basically her HP. Okay, weaknesses. So she has it early on in the game in non-organized play. So like if you're just randomly playing a game in gold or silver or whatever, she's going to have fairly mediocre vision control. The main reason for that is a lot of times the temptation is not to build boots on her because you're attached to other people. Most of the time, you can just work off of their movement speed, and that's nice. That saves you a lot of gold, saves you, 900 to 1,000 gold, depending on the kind of boots you want. So it's going to save you a little bit of gold, but that means that if you go off by yourself to try to go ward, it's very, very dangerous because if you get caught out, you're trying to ward the tri-bush and the jungler jumps out of that bush and CCs you, then you're probably going to die because you're going to be super slow. Also, if you have desynced backs, which means that like your AD carry dies but you survive, which happens a lot, in the bot lane, and you're having to hold the tower, just get that experience, get as much gold as you can and try not to die. Your AD carry shows back up, and then all of a sudden, the lane's kind of equal again, and you're sitting there with like 1,200 gold. It's hard to get a good back in because if you back and your AD carry doesn't back, you're going to be so slow getting back to the lane because you're not going to have them to attach to anymore. So if you have desynced backs because your AD carry dies a lot, or just because they take really poor back timings and you have to stick around and like help your team take a dragon while you're AD carry backed or something like that. If you're just not able to back at the same time and coordinate it, the fact that you're not getting boots is also going to hurt you a lot there. Also fairly dependent on team positioning quite a lot. Now, you know, every champion in League of Legends is going to be somewhat dependent on your team, unless you're like a challenger playing an Iron or something. You know, it's your team's going to affect the outcome of the game most of the time. But Yuumi, more so than almost anybody else, is going to be really dependent on that, especially because she doesn't have those boots. She needs to be attached. She is very squishy. If she gets caught out, she's going to die. And so you really are, in many ways, at the whim of the positioning of the person that you're attached to. Now, you can always choose to detach and run away from the situation. If they're doing something stupid, if that Yasuo is YOLOing 1v4, you know, and you see that he's about to do that, you can detach and run away. So you still have some agency there. It's still your fault if you choose to stay attached and you die. That's on you. But, you know, it's just going to be really hard to get the vision that I just mentioned. Also, it's really hard to hit your Qs in the laning phase if your AD carry doesn't step up in range. You can't really force your Darius to go in and go for the kill when you're attached to him. You know, you might be trying to attach to somebody in a team fight, but they're just not close enough, and you can't reach them fast enough. So there's a lot of things that can go wrong with the positioning on Yuumi. So she is kind of dependent on team positioning, and that's why she's a lot better in pro play oftentimes than she is in solo queue, is because she can have really good vision control later on if you're attached to somebody, a tank, and they understand that you can use your Q to check a bush with the homing missile, right? So that does give you really good vision control if your team understands that and helps you ward. It does give you really reliable harassment if your AD carry steps up to where you're in range to hit your Q. So there's a lot of kind of ifs involved with her. But if you do have a solid team, then it can be good. I would highly recommend, if possible, to try to have a duo partner with Yuumi that sort of knows how she works and will walk with you to help you go get the vision, and will step up in the lane to help you get your Qs. You can make her work just in solo queue, YOLOing, but it is definitely a lot better. She is one that really dramatically improves if you have a duo with you. And then she is very vulnerable to CC that we just mentioned before. Okay, so let's talk about runes and items a little bit, and then we'll talk about some lane positioning, and we'll call it a video. Right, Sadie? Okay. So most of the time, people these days are taking Airy on her. There was a time when people were taking Comet, but I think her damage on her Q has been nerfed enough in the early game to where it's more valuable to take Comet, or to take Airy rather. And games are slowing down a little bit too. You're seeing more people in the bot lane taking lifesteal type of items, like Lucian's coming back in, Blade of the Ruined King's popular on him, Vayne's coming back into the meta a little bit. Even champs that don't traditionally take a lot of lifesteal, more and more of them are taking Bloodline for that sort of lifesteal. You're seeing other enchanters like Nami's very popular right now, Sona's very popular. So getting off enough harassment with Comet in order to force somebody to take a bad back or to force an all-in or a kill early on seems pretty unlikely in this meta, and games are lasting a little bit longer. So I think that Airy is a better, more neutral type of rune you could get, where you're still going to get that harassment early on with Airy, but you're also going to have better scaling later on in the game. When you hop from person to person with your W, that counts as a targeted ability and counts as an Airy proc. So when you jump over to someone else, it's going to give them Airy almost every single time that you jump. You know, every 2 seconds or so, it's going to give them an extra shield. So that's like a, you know, a 70 or an 80 shield in the mid to late game every time you make a jump. So even just jumping back and forth between people in a tight situation can hand out quite a few shields later on. So I think that a lot of people are going for Airy right now for those reasons. Mana flow is pretty obvious. You're going to have mana problems early on, and that's just any champion that's going to be using a lot of mana is really going to want mana flow. Now, Transcendence is the other one I would take here. Just having that extra 10% CDR is pretty nice later on, especially because they took the CDR off of the warding items. So you're almost, it's rare to get to 40% as a support most of the time without Transcendence. So I think that's a pretty good one to take there. You could also take Absolute Focus if you wanted to. If you are going to have like a super harass lane, you're attached to a Senna or you're attached to a Caitlyn or something, and you're going to go really hard on the poke, you can do that. But I don't know. I probably would. I just think Transcendence is a bit more reliable. But if you do want to go for the Comet version, then you can go Comet and then Comet, Absolute Focus, and Scorch. If you want to go for the trifecta of like Ultra Harassment in the lane with a Caitlyn or a Center or something, you can do that. But I just like to go for the more scaling type of version. Speaking of which, Gathering Storm. So you can take Scorch, but once again, same thing as I mentioned before. If you're not going Comet, if you're not going Absolute Focus, I probably wouldn't go Scorch. It's just not going to do enough. When you're thinking of these early game harassment type of options and runes and items, you really have to ask yourself, am I going to force them to take a bad back and miss CS? Or am I going to like bully them out of the lane? Or are we just going to sit here and basically have a farm off and, you know, they're going to have about the same amount of CS as I will? If you're really confident that you're going to be able to force them to take a bad back or to harass them off of a wave, and you're going to get some appreciable difference, right? They're going to be down 10 or 15 CS at like 6 minutes, then I think that going for those early harassment runes can be really good. But if you think you're just not going to be able to do it, then you're better off just going for scaling runes. Because after they get their first back in, usually the poke is just not going to matter that much anymore off of something like Scorch. You know, when they have 1,000 extra health, doing an extra 20 damage on a Scorch hit every now and then is really not going to matter that much. In the early game, when they have like maybe 600, 700 health, and they don't have a lot of sustain in their items, and their support maybe is kind of, you know, running low on mana before they get 50 fairy charms to just spam healing, then maybe it matters a little bit. But it's such a small window of time. It's like you have 5 minutes to, you know, get a big influence in the laning phase, or it's just not going to matter anymore. So I would rather just take Gathering Storm there. It's going to give you some guaranteed power for later on in the game. So you are kind of giving up the early game. And, you know, you got to make the call on that. Once again, if you have the Senna, the Caitlyn, the Misfortune, something with good harassment early, maybe it does make sense to get Comet and, you know, Transcendence and Scorch, that package. Right? Because that does add up. I mean, if Comet does an extra, you know, 20 damage more than Airy, and then Transcendence is going to be, you know, maybe chip in an extra 5 damage per hit, and then Scorch is giving another 15, you know, that's 40 extra damage every time you hit your Q, like when all that adds up. And that really does add up. But you are giving up a lot of that late game potential power. So it's up to you. If you have Vayne or Ezreal on your team, definitely don't do it. If you have your duoed with a Senna that you know is on point and is going to put in a lot of harassment, you know, maybe consider it. And the secondaries, this is pretty standard. Almost everybody does this. I think Presence of Mind and Cut Down are where you want to be. Presence of Mind just gives you so much mana later on in the game. It just fixes a lot of your mana issues because it not only gives you a flat mana 500, which is a lot. You know, that's like 700 or 800 gold worth of value there, but it refunds 20% of your mana pool every time you get a kill or an assist in a fight. And if the fights go long, you definitely can start running out of mana. I mean, when your basic spell costs 160 mana, every time you start casting it in mid-game team fights, you know, that can end up being a huge problem. So I still think Presence of Mind is really good. And then Cut Down is nice as well. That does give you a little bit of extra harass. I know I just said the extra harass is questionable in the current meta, but there's really not a great other rune you can take. I mean, you could take like the Tenacity rune if they have a lot of CC, but really you should be able to avoid most CC if you're choosing when to attach and when to not attach. So I think Cut Down is still kind of the go-to rune there. Okay, so that's pretty much it for runes. I mean, I guess, I don't know, I guess you could maybe try like Revitalize, Shield Bash or something. I don't know. The vast majority, I think you really have to have Presence of Mind with you, man. So that's just what I would go with the vast majority of the time. Okay, as far as items go, you need to get Athenes really early on. Unless you know, like you're doing with someone that you know is a really good player and they're really going to be able to abuse Arden Sensor early on. So if you're doing with like a one-trick Vayne who's super strong, like maybe you could get Arden first. But I think a lot of times you want Athenes because that synergizes so well, like I said before, with her Q. Because you can stack it up, add a combat from a very safe distance most of the time. That's just going to give you a huge burst of healing. whenever you use your E on somebody. And also, the extra mana regen that you get off of your Frost Fang translates into 10 extra AP on your Athene. So anytime you have a champ that gets Frost Fang, Athene's is going to be a very attractive item for that reason. It's just super cost efficient, adds a lot of extra healing and a lot of extra damage. I mean, it ends up being like between 70 and 90 AP on a 2100 gold item in most circumstances once you get 2 or 3 items. So it's a very, very good item. Frostfang, you absolutely want to do that. Great synergy with Athene's. I really wouldn't. You should be able to trigger Frostfang off of your Qs in the landing phase. If it's going to be an extremely bad situation, excuse me, then you could, I guess, consider Relic Shield, but the vast, vast majority of the time you should be getting Frostfang. Now, this one is a little bit more controversial. Which boots do you get, or do you get boots at all? And in higher elo, you'll see almost all of the one-tricks will never get boots on Yuumi. The main reason for that is you can always just be attached to someone else on your team, right? And they can give you that movement speed, so you don't even need boots. If your AD carry backs at the same time as you, or you're on the same page with the Darius on your team, or the Diana, or whatever, you don't need boots. And that does end up saving you, like 900 gold a lot of times. But the issue is, a big one is warding and rotations, What if you need to go ward the Tribush by yourself and your AD carry just refuses to leave the lane? They're just sitting there and they want to harass under tower, but you're thinking, no, we need to ward this Tribush, or I need to go ward the dragon because Olaf can sneak at level 4 or something like that. If you have to go off by yourself, that's bad. Or maybe there's a fight breaking out in your own jungle and your AD carry's not walking up there and you need to jump off and you need to go rotate to help defend your jungle. Or maybe you see a really good opportunity to try to roam and make a play in the mid lane. Then if you don't have boots, you're just going to be way, way too slow. Or the desynced backs, like I mentioned before. If you take 2 or 3 backs in the game and it's desynced, you're losing out on a lot of time. And if it takes you an extra 5 seconds to get to the lane, and there's a minion wave crashing into the tower, you could be losing out on quite a bit of experience in the long run because you're not able to get there fast enough. Movement speed is extremely important on a lot of supports because you have to leave experience zones for a long time, either to ward or to rotate or for a desynced back or whatever. And so your movement speed directly correlates with your experience a lot of times, right? And so you might actually end up in a game where you don't have boots in low elo. You might end up like 1 or 2 levels lower than the enemy support strictly because of your movement speed restrictions. So in higher elo, once again, where people understand that and they're going to let you hitch a ride more often, they're going to be able to sync up their backs a lot more with you and stuff like that, then it's not as big of a deal. But if you're down in like silver or gold or, lower than that, I think that Ionian boots are perfectly respectable. That's going to allow you to rotate better, ward better, deal with desynced backs better. It's only 900 gold, which isn't the end of the world. And you do get the 10% CDR, which is really strong. I just mentioned CDR. It's kind of rare to cap out anyways in the meta right now. And you get a 10% cooldown on your summoners. And usually you take 2 offensive summoners. Often it's either Ignite and Heal or Exhaust Ignite are the 2 most common combinations. And that means that every fight those are up, you can be using those to have a huge influence on a fight. It's not like Flash, where a lot of times you end up holding that with a lot of champions, and it's good to have cooldown reduction on Flash, but it's not something that you're actively looking to use every time it's up, right? Versus Ignite, pretty much every time it's up, you want to be using that in an all-in fight, and it's on a lower cooldown, so you can use it more often. So I think that the 10% cooldown on summoners is actually quite good. So it's up to you. I have even seen high elo people in the past going Ionian boots with Yuumi. Like I said, it's not super common these days. Let me see. I think Helsen... A lot of the ones that I was looking at were not getting it all the time or really that much. But once again, these are like challenger, best of the best, like Yuumi players, and they're going to be playing with people that synergize a lot better. So it's up to you. It's controversial. I have seen some high-low Yuumis end up taking the boots. Let me see if this person has boots or not. I don't think it's going to show us. So, you can kind of feel it out. You can try the no boots version, but just be aware and just think, okay, is that mattering? Like, is it more important for me to have 900 extra gold, or is it more important for me to show up to some of these situations 3 or 4 seconds faster? So, that can come up a lot. If that 900 gold gives you the extra Arden Sensor, and now you have Athene's plus Arden Sensor ready to go for this really important team fight for the second Rift Scuttle top lane, and that's why you win the fight, because you had that extra item there. It was worth, right? It was worth not to get boots. But if you're finding yourself like, damn, I was 3 seconds late for that fight, everyone just died because I couldn't get a heal in there, or I'm consistently 1 or 2 levels behind the enemy support, or just stuff like that. If you just feel like you're always a little behind or a little late, then maybe get the boots. So it's up to you. It's controversial. I don't think there's a great answer for it always, but that's just the best way to think of it is, do you want the 900 gold in your pocket, or do you want to get to places a little bit faster? And I don't think there's an easy answer for that. Depends on your elo. Depends on, how you play around it. Okay, Arden Sensor is another really big one that you want in a lot of situations. Now, if you're playing with an AD carry that doesn't utilize the on-hit that well, if you're playing with, like, Ezreal or Jhin or something like that really doesn't use the attack speed that well, maybe consider something else. But if you have a Vayne or a Kai'Sa or an Aphelios or a Misfortune, then Arden Sensor can still be really good. And it's good on champions that, maybe are not AD carries that like attack speed. So things like Master Yi, things like Diana, all of those will probably like Arden Sensor. And the thing about Ardent, though, also, and I guess this is an option that I just thought about. I suppose you could, if you want to skip the boots, you could maybe delay Athene's until second item and go for Ardent Sensor first and get Aether Wisp. That would at least give you 10% bonus movement speed, which would be about the equivalent of brown boots. So if you're rushing Aether Wisp early on, maybe that will make up for the fact that you're not going to have movement speed from boots. So that could be an option. I haven't really studied specifically these all of these different builds here, but I do know that almost all of them, from what I'm remembering, I don't know if it's going to have his games in here or not. He's just been ARAMing a lot. Now he's rushing Athene's, but he does get Arden Sensor, but it looks like most of them still rush Athene's most of the time. Yeah. Athene's didn't even get Ardent. Yeah, so I guess, they're just not really that worried about the movement speed, but once again, they have a lot of coordinated stuff. Wow, he's only D4, what? I thought he was at least D1 or D2. Anyways, so that is perhaps an option in there as well. Dark Seal is another one that a lot of people get. It gives you flat mana, which is going to be very handy if you don't die, which is totally possible with Yuumi if you're, playing around your tanks correctly. It is possible to conserve those stacks and get a lot of value out of Magi's. So getting a Dark Seal is pretty low risk. It's 350 gold. It gives you a little bit more value out of your potions. But I think the most important thing is it gives you that flat amount of extra mana, which is really nice on her. Now, Redemption is another one that's really common on her. Great synergy with Athene's extra 150% mana regen that you get. Does end up converting over to, I think it's 30 extra AP, which is really nice off the Athene's. Good team fight synergy. So that's really great, especially if you have a champion on your team or two that are going to be getting extra healing, tanky-like champions. So stuff that's going to get Spirit Visage or is going to stack a lot of resistances. That heal is going to have some extra value. So I think that's pretty solid. And then Shurelya's is something that I don't see a lot of top-end Yuumi's getting, but I think is really undervalued. I've been getting it a lot in pretty much on any enchanter. The extra movement speed is so solid. It really helps out a ton. You do have some movement speed with your E, obviously, to help people engage, but you stack your E with your Shurelya's, and that's a tremendous amount of engage for your whole team. The extra mana regen off of it is going to synergize extremely well with Athene's as well. You're going to get some bonus off of that. And it does give you extra plus healing and shielding. So I think that Shurelya's is a really solid item, particularly if you have those meatballs that just want to dive in there and kill people, and that's almost every team comp now. So I think that's pretty solid. Now, the last couple of things I'll talk about here with the LoL Planner. This is a pretty good website, too. I use it a lot to just talk about positioning in lane. But in general, you want to be you don't want to be as attached as much as people often think, as the meme is with Yuumi in the laning phase. You want to be looking definitely when you're, we'll say like this is the minion wave here. When your AD carry is, you know, going up, trying to last hit, especially if your passive is up, you want to be trying to see if you can get that hit on the AD carry to trigger that passive. Now, don't mess with the support most of the time. The support's really the dangerous one most of the time in the laning phase, depending on who it is. If it's like a Nautilus or a Leona or something like that, it's obviously going to be really dangerous. But just see if you can like get an angle to where you're able to hit the AD carry, but the support is not able to hit you. Because sometimes supports will just like AFK in this bush for a little bit and try to get a sneaky hook on you or something. If you can just come over here, just tag the AD carry, and you want to hit him when he's trying to hit a minion. So whenever he steps up to auto attack a minion, then you can auto attack him. And I think she still gets that 50 extra range, right? Yes. And I forgot her base auto. Her base range is 500. So that's going to give her 550, which is going to be pretty pretty basic, right? So that's going to be, you're going to have the same range as like Vayne. You're going to have a little bit more than Kai'Sa, same range as Ezreal. Obviously not as much as someone like a Senna or a Caitlyn. But you should be able to walk up, auto attack. Even if they hit you back, then it'll just break your shield or do some damage to your shield. But then you can reattach. It'll give the remaining shield over to your AD carry, and it gives you that extra burst of mana. So what you want to be doing then is just any time that your shield is up, you want to pop off, see if you can get that auto attack, reattach, and then start throwing Qs. So usually it'll be something like, you know, throw a Q, pop off, auto attack, attach, throw a Q, wait around for a little bit, pop off, auto attack. So I would say that you want to make sure whenever you pop off that you're going to be able to get back on. So make sure that your W is off a cooldown. So whenever you hop back on, don't hop back off immediately. But just see what you can do. And if you're like successfully able to get like multiple hits on them, even when your passive's not up, that's good. It's going to be triggering Airy extra times. The extra auto attack does matter. You do have to be careful with the minions though, because whenever you auto attack, it is going to trigger minion aggro. Now, if you hop onto the AD carry, it'll drop the aggro. But if you want to stay out and auto attack more, then just be aware of that. So don't do that if the minion wave is too high. So, you know, try to be looking for those auto attacks whenever you can to get the shield, get the extra mana. Try to avoid the enemy support whenever possible. In the laning phase, I'm trying to think of what else can work. Now, another thing is you can help push the wave too. This is something that I don't see a lot of Yuumis do. But if your AD carry is trying to push this wave, you know, maybe they're a Caitlyn, they want to harass under tower or a Senna or whatever, you can auto attack the minions, right? So you just pop off, you know, do your thing, get your shield, and then just auto attack the minions, right? You know, and a good way to do this is just don't auto attack it if it's within like 1/3 of its health or so. Just auto attack healthy ones, you know, get them down to about 1/3 health, and then let your AD carry get those last hits on them. Don't attack it if it's less than 1/3 health, or it might throw off your AD carry. Okay, so pay attention. You're not trying to mess up their CSing. You're just trying to get it a little bit low so that it pushes. And remember that in general, in solo queue, and this is despite what a lot of these challenger coaching videos will tell you, you want to be pushing in most solo queue brackets. You want to be pushing. The main reason is that's going to open you up so that you're able to go get some of these wards down that you need to have down in the early game, if possible. So that's going to keep you a little bit safer, and you definitely need that as Yuumi. And it's going to allow you to come over here and contest the scuttle, right? So whenever this first scuttle is up, like Yuumi's not necessarily the most brutal scuttle or abuser in the game, right? But if your jungler's down here trying to get scuttle, you know, their jungler's over here, like also trying to get scuttle, they're fighting for it, which is pretty common, then if you push the wave up, your team can get up here. And I've talked about this in past like macro videos, but they have to make a choice then. If the enemy wants to come there, they're going to have to go around the long way through your vision most of the time in the tri-bush, and they're going to have to give up these minions, right? So if they want to come down there and mess around with you, they're going to lose all these minions to the tower. And so a minion wave is going to be worth, you know, about 100 to 120 gold without a cannon minion. And so that's going to be like about 1/3 to half of the kill, depending on what's going on there. Probably about half a kill, and they're losing the experience at the tower, and the tower is taking chip damage, so it's going to be easier for you to come up and take plates later. So that's always where you want to be. If you're going to rotate pretty much anywhere, you always want to have the wave pushed up. So if you know that Scuttle's coming up and you want to help your jungler take it, or hell, if you have an AD carry that can take it pretty quickly, like you have a Vayne or something that does pretty good damage to Scuttle, because she can like pin it into a wall if she knows what she's doing, and then trigger her silver bolts and get a bunch of extra damage and stuff like that on it, then you can come up here, push in, and you can go contest the Scuttle yourself. So once again, Yuumi's not the most brutal scuttler fighter out there, but if you just get really good positioning, then you can do that. Or maybe your jungler, y'all are trying to get the dragon here, right? Maybe your jungler's on this side of the map. Maybe you see that, you know, the enemy jungler's up here, like in this tri-bush, you know, clearing a ward or something. Or maybe they're sitting on a ward, or they're actively trying to gank your top laner. Your jungler's over here, like, doing Gromp or whatever, and you're sitting here as Yuumi. You can immediately ping the dragon, if you want to. Say, hey, do dragon, do dragon, do dragon. And then just start auto-attacking this wave as much as you can. Now, she obviously is not going to have a ton of wave clear, but just do what you can. Auto-attack the wave, you know, get this pushed in, and same deal, rotate over here to go do dragon. And if they want to go take a look at that, that's fine. They're paying a price, right? They're paying that, you know, 100, 120 gold, third of a level. You always want them paying a price. So they have to pay to play. They have to pay to come look at you. And then even if they want to come look at you, then they're still probably going to lose the fight because their jungler's on the top side, right? So that's something that I see a lot of Yuumi's not doing, and other types of supports that have really good push, like Karma, and stuff like that, you know, they know to push. But Yuumi, like, you can push. If you want to, you can push. And I think that, you know, like I said, a lot of times that's the default position you want to be in. As long as you have good vision control and you're not going to get ganked, or it's less likely you're going to get ganked, you want to push. Now, obviously, you need to be careful, because if the enemy jungler is down here and you're pushed up, you know, Yuumi's not the type of champ where you want to sit here under their tower, you know, 24/7 and try to harass, right? Like, you can attach and get some harassment going in there, but you need to be very, very careful, depending on the support they have. If they have a Leona, a Nautilus, or whatever, if they have a lot of engage and their jungler, like, wraps around, that's going to be really bad. So usually what you want to do is push and then do something with your priority instead of harass under tower. You can still harass if you want to, but try to go get Scuttle, go get some deeper vision, go get Dragon, get a preferable back timing, just back, you know, get an early power spike on items. If you're level 6, you can even bait them a little bit. You get a, you know, like a pink ward or something in this bush, and then you can, you know, just communicate with your AD carry, just set it up, you know, to where you're both right here. The wave resets, they walk up, you just do your ult out of the bush, get a kill on them. So just do something productive with your priority. But don't forget, even with Yuumi, even as someone who's thought, you know, a lot of people think, oh, I got to stay attached, I got to be super safe all the time. That's not necessarily the case. Yes, you should be doing that late game a lot of the time, but in the laning phase, you can still auto-attack harass, you can still push the wave, and you can still rotate and try to go make plays. Okay, so she's not going to be, once again, as brutal as, you know, like Blitzcrank or something, right, who pushes up and then roams and, you know, ganks the jungler, ganks the mid laner, just is throwing hooks everywhere. It's not going to be that type of thing, but it's still something that you can do as Yuumi that you should be taking advantage of. Okay. All right, well, that's going to be about it. We're already over an hour here, so I'll go ahead and end it there. But thank you very much once again to Black Falcon. I know that I do have a Teemo support guide coming up soon, so I'll try to have that ready for you by tomorrow as well, so stay tuned for that. Then, like I said, we do new tier lists for every single patch, and then I stream every night starting around 10:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. So come on out. We'd love to have you, and I'll see you next time. Have a great day.